All right. Welcome to Rapid Fire Manufacturing, back with Chris Luecke, his second time on the show. I'm sure everyone knows Manufacturing Happy Hour. Chris, thank you so much for joining.
David, it's good to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I got a better background. It's not the brick wall. So, yeah.
Hey, you gotta start somewhere. My background just evolved. I just moved offices and things like that. So any background is a good background to get started. That's always my opinion.
I like that. Absolutely. So today I want to talk about networking. What are some tips and strategies that you could give someone who maybe is new to networking, or maybe their current strategies just aren't working the way that they want?
Yeah, I'll share a story. I was probably like, I don't know, 24, 25. I've been working in Houston as a sales guy in the automation industry for, I don't know, 2, 3 years or so. And, I'd been spending all my time hanging out with friends, making new friends down there. I hadn't lived there and things like that. And for whatever reason, I think I stumbled upon some Google article, and it was like, you need to be going to like one networking event a week or something like that. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, I don't really even know what any of this is, right? So, you know, as you might imagine, like on meetup.com, there were general like meet other professionals in your area like events, and that was one of the first ones I went to, right? And that is, I think, what a lot of people default to when they think of networking. But I'll tell you what, it was, I mean, for all practical purposes, I'm glad I went out there to like start
Yeah.
getting back out there, but it was a terrible networking event, right? It wasn't well curated. It was a bunch of random people, a lot of financial advisors and things like that. And it just
Mhm.
wasn't a curated spot where I could find people relevant to my niche in manufacturing. So, I kind of went back from that. I'm like, well, that networking event kind of sucks. I guess networking sucks, right? But that was totally wrong.
Mhm.
I think we really need to rethink what networking and a networking event looks like. For example, when I am working from a coffee shop in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I live, you could consider that networking because yesterday, one of my colleagues that I've run into a handful of times within the Milwaukee startup scene came up and he's like, hey, there's this guy you should meet. He's throwing a manufacturing event next week. I would not have known about that had I not been outside of my home office and building relationships with the Milwaukee startup community on a regular basis, right? That's a more
Yeah.
relevant niche to me. So what I've kind of shared are two examples of what does a bad networking event look like, and what does good networking looks like. And we'll get into what good networking looks like more in this conversation. But I thought that might be a helpful place to start.
Absolutely. And I think there is that misconception that not even that. You go to one networking event that really isn't your niche, and then you just label every networking event as wrong or
hmm
terrible. And that's, yeah, I could totally see that throwing everything off.
I mean, I'll take that to another level. Being within the Milwaukee startup scene, and I have a handful of niches that I'm in, right? The
Mhm.
manufacturing niche, the Milwaukee startup niche. Those are some of the areas where I can deliberately meet people that are relevant to the things I care about, that are relevant to my business. I was chatting with one of the individuals from that group. I'm like, hey, do you want to like, we'd been meaning to catch up over coffee or something like that. And I'm like, why don't we just go out paddleboarding on Lake Michigan on Friday morning instead? Networking doesn't have to look like what we've thought networking has looked like or what we've defaulted to for the longest time. It can be activities like that, the same way golf has been for decades.
Absolutely. I just did that in Knoxville with one of my, he's a customer, but he's also a friend. And we went hiking. It's pretty cool to, like, networking's different now than maybe it was in the past, right?
100%. Yeah, another great example. Hiking, paddleboarding. There it always seems to be a trend of like getting outside, right? Going for a run with
Yeah.
someone. That all falls under the networking umbrella. And quite frankly, when done right, networking is also just hanging out. And it's a lot more fun that way versus like feeling like you
Mhm.
need to go in with an agenda and a set of questions you need to ask someone like an interrogation.
Yeah, absolutely. Now to get back to what is the good networking, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, one characteristic I would say of good networking is going in with intention. And this is something I share before I go to any manufacturing trade show. I usually share a post that Says, this is my goal for being at this trade show. I'm looking for 10 new guests for the podcasts for 2026, or I'm looking for 5 new partners that might want to sponsor my manufacturing tours. Whatever the goal may be, if you're working for a manufacturing company, it might be, hey, we want to meet, 10 prospects that we've spoken with online in the past, and this is our first time for an in-person discussion, whether that's at Automate, IMTS, whatever it may be. I think having those type of goals is key to networking. Otherwise, it's with anything, right? If you don't go into it with a goal, how do you know you're going to accomplish what you're looking for when you go into that event? And that doesn't mean be overly disciplined with your goal, right? You want to go in and be open to serendipity and new things that might pop up, like a conversation in a hallway at a trade show, but have some intentionality to it. I think that's one of the key aspects of good networking.
That's really, I like that a lot too, because it can be overstimulating when you get into some of these. So if you say, "Hey, I want to talk to 5 machine tool builders and 3 just like set some quantifiable targets. That way you're not like, "Hey, I have to talk to 1,000 people." No, just start small and then go from there. And then your confidence builds and you'll feel like you can, yeah, talk to anyone.
And here's the other thing, and this is both networking but also a trade show tactic. I always have like an Evernote file. That's the file that's the app that I use to kind of organize my life and my notes and things like that. I
Oh,
always
okay.
keep an ongoing list of my critical follow-ups after that event, right? Because you meet someone, you shake their hand, and it's all well and good. But if you don't do anything with that relationship or that interaction after the fact, more than likely it's going to fall by the wayside and nothing's going to come of it. So the other thing I would say about networking is it's just important what you do after as what you do during the event or the interaction as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what advice would you give to someone for that follow-up? Are you doing it within a week? Are you doing 2 weeks? What does your follow-up kind of look like?
Yeah, good question. I wouldn't over analyze what the follow up looks like. I would say, here's my main thought, right? I'm not going to send it while I'm still at a trade show because everyone's still really busy there and things like that. Kind of gauge the urgency, right? Like if it's one of those things that if it is critical for your business or it is something that is very timely, I mean, no reason to wait, right? I'm probably sending a note the Monday the following week, for example,
Mhm.
around that. But I think here's the way I would answer this. When I make that list, I kind of do it in priority order. I'm like, hey, here are my top 3 things that I need to do now that this event, this trade show, this networking session, now that all these things are done. These are the most important folks I got to follow up with. That's not, and obviously this isn't to say not everyone is important, right? But some things are going to be more relevant, timely, etc., to your business, your goals. So that's what I would say. It's not necessarily like, oh, you got to follow up within the next week or two. I think in general that's good, so it's still fresh. But I would just prioritize and making sure you're doing the critical follow-ups as quickly as you can.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. The reason I asked too is because I've had occasions where people will just hammer you with sales pitches after they met you that first time. And it's like your next objective is to build that relationship with them outside of the trade show or event. Like, hey, let's just go have some coffee and we can continue our conversation.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's a really good question, and that's a good point. And I wasn't necessarily thinking it as from the perspective of like an automation sales guy, like I had been for years. I mean, you don't want to be too anxious, right? You kind of want to gauge like the need a little bit.
mhm.
You want to be building that relationship. A lot of times, here's what I would say, and this is maybe where this is super important. I have such a presence on LinkedIn in that I'm consistent on there. I'm building those like I'm showcasing my brand in an authentic way on a regular basis that when I end up at an event, a networking event, a trade show, a conference, whatever it is, there has been to an extent, like some micro interactions with the people I'm meeting with for the first time at that event. They already know me a bit. They already trust me a bit. So when I'm talking about that follow up, this is follow up with individuals that have gotten to know me through my social media presence that there's already a bit of established trust and rapport there. So what I would say is this is why we've been talking a lot about what to do at the event and what to do
Mhm.
after the event. but it's just as important to be present within your niches before the networking takes place, because then you already have a bit of rapport, and then it's much easier to follow up in a quick fashion, or it's much easier to develop that, hey, this is the reason that you and I need to continue to build our relationship, or this is the reason you and I need to talk about this collaboration opportunity right away, rather than something that some people might think is a nice to have. Because let's be honest, if someone's at a conference and they've met 5 people there, but one of them they feel like they understand what their brand is all about because they've interacted in advance of the event, in general, there's going to be more trust within that relationship already, and there's more likelihood of following up and taking action and moving forward and doing business after that event is over. Does that make sense? Did I
Absolutely.
articulate that the right way?
You did. So you differentiated between completely cold
Yeah.
versus those micro interactions, which is amazing because if you would have told me this like a year ago, I would have had no idea like what that
Mhm.
meant. But now utilizing LinkedIn the way, building up that brand, it's been phenomenal having those where I almost know the people at a level where I feel comfortable. So when you want to continue and you meet them in person, it's really cool to see everything play out.
Yeah, David, you are a practitioner of the good networking best practices, right? And as I was starting this interview with you today, I kind of forgot that I've done so much online to build up my brand with the people that I ultimately end up networking with in person, that I was kind of answering these questions from the perspective of someone that's put in that legwork. I think it's, not to say that if you haven't done that, if you haven't built up an online brand that you're toast or you shouldn't go to a networking event. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But I need to do a better job of empathizing with the folks that haven't done that.
Mhm.
Really, it's just a process, right? There's things you can do before it. There's things you can do after the event to like during the event to make it more intentional. And then there's things you can do after the event to make sure your follow up is timely. Because at the end of the day, networking is just all about building relationships and trying to get things done, right? And if you don't have the relationship, it's going to be hard to have the trust you need to get things done in your business and the business of the individual that you're interacting with.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I can give you an example real quick. Before I went to AME last year, I did all my outreach. I ended up connecting with one of the gentlemen that I saw him online. So I already felt like I've known him a little bit because of all his posts. Ended up getting him on rapid fire actually today, but goes a long way just having that interaction before you go to these events with those people.
Yeah. Hey, another great point that you just kind of brought up there. Another aspect about networking when you're doing that outreach, because I think doing outreach with people in advance of an event is a key hallmark of intentionality in networking, right? You're
Mhm.
doing the pre work before you get there. The other thing I would say is when you're sending that message, don't make it about you, make it about them. If there's someone I'm interested in, here's the deal. If I'm interested in partnering with someone, featuring someone on the podcast, doing business with them, whatever the scenario, I still need to get to know them, and there needs to be trust in that relationship. So the majority of the time when I'm networking, that's all I'm focused on in the beginning. I'm just doing things that build trust, that get us on one another's radar. So when I'm sending that note, usually I'm saying, "Hey, so and so, I love that post you put on LinkedIn yesterday. I love what your company is doing right now in, insert vertical here," right? Just one sentence about them and say, "Hey, I'm going to be at IMTS next week," right? Next year is an IMTS year. For example, I'd love to meet you. For context, I'm a manufacturing podcaster, right? Just so they kind of know you're in the niche, but I always lead off with talking about them rather than talking about myself. And I think that's key for anyone that's trying to build trust and build relationships.
Wish I had this before, you know, a year ago because I used to go in and, taught to just pitch slap, right? And
Yeah.
you're never going to go anywhere with that, especially nowadays. Like the
Yep.
second you sound salesy like that, it's like, nope, not responding.
Well, here's the good thing. Both you and I have long careers ahead of us. So even if people are listening to this and they're just picking this up now and they're kind of banging their head against the wall, it's like, "Oh man, I've been doing this wrong for months, for years, whatever it is," right? There's going to be another opportunity to network probably next week within your industry. So take one or two things you learn from this conversation, start to apply it, and it'll be incredible how your relationships start to blossom exponentially.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, in rapid fire fashion, we'll end here. I hope you have a good weekend. Last tip for anyone out there. It doesn't even have to be related to networking, just a general tip.
Gosh, a lot of my tips are around networking. I'm trying to think of a good one. This is a little. This is I'll go a completely different direction. I'll go a podcasting tip because you've got such a cool background with all the different hats. You can rotate them in and out. I think we're in a day and age where it's more of a requirement to have a good background within your office, right? I
Yeah,
continue to catch people that are off guard or when they're going to record their first podcast, they're like, gosh, I don't know where I'm going to record it. Do you allow virtual backgrounds and things like that? I would say just find a spot where you can put a couple hats like you. I say a couple hats. You have like a dozen hats behind you right now. I've got my neon light gear, but hey, anything like a plant or a book, something that kind of makes it look a little homey. Because hey, at the end of the day, podcast appearances, showing up, looking good online, that is an aspect of networking as well.
100%. And if anyone's curious, go watch a couple of my first podcasts and see what a bad example looks like. So,
And that is okay. Everyone's got to
yeah,
start somewhere. You and I were chatting about that before we got on the call today, before we hit record. So, hey, I think the most important thing, if I were to give one piece of advice, is even if you feel like you're behind the eight ball, just getting started, wish you started earlier, start today. Grab one of the tips that David and I talked about today and start making incremental improvements as you go along.
awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks a ton, David.